Behind the charming smile that once captivated millions of American hearts, Troy Donahue hid an unexpected secret. During Hollywood's golden years, he had a secret romance with two prominent stars, names that shocked the world when the truth was revealed. And the most surprising detail? These two heartthrobs were gay, forced to conceal their true selves for the sake of their careers. So, who were they? And how did Donahue's love story unfold? Let's dive in and uncover the details. In the late 1950s, at a time when American cinema was still clinging to the carefully polished ideals of post-war optimism, a new kind of matinee idol emerged: Troy Donahue. Tall, strikingly handsome, and radiating a kind of clean-cut innocence that perfectly matched the cultural mood of the era, Donahue was sculpted by the studio system to embody the dream of youthful romance. His breakout came in 1959 with A Summer Place, a melodrama that became a generational touchstone. The film not only launched a hit theme song that continues to evoke nostalgia, but also cemented Donahue as the quintessential dreamboat of the late Eisenhower years. To a generation of American teenagers, his image, blonde hair, boyish smile, and disarming vulnerability, was the embodiment of first love itself. Warner Brothers recognized his potential and wasted no time crafting him into a marketable brand. The studio specialized in manufacturing stars who fit into clearly defined categories, and Donahue was molded into the ideal romantic lead: gentle, wholesome, and endlessly photogenic. He was the antidote to the growing anxiety in American society, a safe harbor for young women who could project their fantasies of love and stability onto his screen persona. The machine worked. Fan magazines placed him on their covers, and his presence on television talk shows further amplified the aura of accessibility. In the eyes of his admirers, he was not just a Hollywood actor. He was an attainable dream, a promise that love and loyalty were still possible in a rapidly changing world. Yet the world did change, and with it, the demands of cinema. By the mid-1960s, Hollywood found itself on the cusp of a revolution. The rise of gritty realism, method acting, and darker, more morally ambiguous characters shifted the landscape away from the idyllic archetypes that had sustained the previous decade. Figures like Marlon Brando, James Dean, though gone too soon, and later Dustin Hoffman and Al Pacino embodied a new masculinity, one that was raw, conflicted, and reflective of the turbulence of the times. Against this backdrop, Donahue's carefully cultivated image of gentle innocence began to feel like an artifact. For Donahue, the transition was brutal. The very qualities that had once made him irresistible, his softness, his boy-next-door aura, his polished lack of danger, now rendered him obsolete. Roles dwindled, the phone calls stopped, and what had once been an effortless climb to the top suddenly became a free fall. Like many who had been carefully groomed by the studio system, he discovered that the machinery that creates stars rarely knows how to save them once the public taste moves on. The decline in his career coincided with an equally destructive personal battle. Stripped of steady work and the validation that had once surrounded him, Donahue spiraled into alcohol and drug dependency. The tabloids that had once celebrated him now chronicled his unraveling. Behind the headlines, the reality was far harsher: mounting debts, broken relationships, and at one point, the humiliation of homelessness. Hollywood is often described as a city that discards its icons once they no longer serve a purpose, and few stories illustrate this more starkly than Donahue's. The golden boy who once represented innocence and romantic fantasy became a cautionary tale of what happens when the dream factory closes its doors. And yet, Donahue's life was not defined solely by tragedy. In later years, after a long and arduous battle, he managed to break free from the grip of addiction. Sobriety gave him a new perspective, and although he never reclaimed the stardom of his youth, he found a kind of second act. He appeared in smaller roles on television and in film, often leaning into the nostalgia for his earlier career. He also became a fixture at retrospective events where fans of classic Hollywood celebrated him not for what he had lost, but for what he had once given them. In those moments, Donahue occupied a rare position, a living connection to a bygone era, a reminder of the studio system's peculiar ability to manufacture dreams out of flesh and blood. His final years were quieter, marked less by scandal and more by reflection. Friends and fans who encountered him during this period often remarked on his humility and willingness to engage with the public. He knew the arc of his career had been unusual: meteoric rise, devastating fall, partial redemption, but he seemed at peace with it. When asked about the turbulence of his past, he spoke candidly, acknowledging the mistakes while also recognizing the forces beyond his control. In September 2001, Troy Donahue's story came to its inevitable close. At the age of 65, after suffering 2 consecutive heart attacks and complications from heart surgery, he passed away. His death marked the end of a life that had been as cinematic as any of his films: meteoric success, devastating collapse, and a bittersweet redemption. If the arc of Troy Donahue's career was emblematic of Hollywood's ruthless machinery, then the secrets he carried were a mirror of its deepest hypocrisies. In the 1990s, decades after the height of his fame, Donahue offered a revelation that startled both fans and industry insiders. He spoke openly, though with a tone of weary resignation, about relationships that had defined him privately, even as he projected a very different image publicly. These were not casual encounters or passing rumors. They involved 2 of the most iconic leading men of his generation, Anthony Perkins and Rock Hudson, both of whom, like Donahue himself, had been forced to live double lives in an era when homosexuality was treated as a professional death sentence. The timing of Donahue's disclosure was not incidental. By the 1990s, Hollywood was beginning to reckon, however belatedly, with its treatment of LGBTQ+ actors. The AIDS crisis had decimated an entire generation of performers, forcing uncomfortable questions into the open about sexuality, secrecy, and the culture of denial that had long pervaded the industry. Against this backdrop, Donahue's voice carried a poignant weight. He was no longer the fresh-faced dreamboat of a summer place, but an aging survivor who had lived through both the intoxicating promises and the cruel betrayals of Hollywood. And perhaps because he had little left to lose, he could finally speak with a candor that would have been unthinkable in his youth. The first name he revealed was Anthony Perkins, the actor immortalized as Norman Bates in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. To the public, Perkins was the very definition of tortured complexity, a man whose roles often exuded nervous energy and vulnerability. To Donahue, however, Perkins was something else entirely: gentle, intuitive, and deeply empathetic. Donahue described their relationship not as scandalous or sensational, but as quietly profound. "He understood me," Donahue said in one rare interview, capturing the essence of a connection that had been both nourishing and dangerous. At a time when studio contracts often included morality clauses that could end a career overnight, their romance was shrouded in secrecy, shared only in stolen moments and coded gestures. If Perkins represented intimacy and emotional resonance, Rock Hudson symbolized something altogether different. Hudson, who reigned as the paragon of heterosexual masculinity in the 1950s and 1960s, was the star Hollywood had built to reassure America that its leading men were strong, virile, and unquestioningly straight. His rugged frame, booming voice, and effortless charm made him a box office guarantee, and also a prisoner of his own image. Behind the facade, however, Hudson was navigating the same treacherous terrain as Donahue and Perkins. Donahue's connection to Hudson was briefer, more fleeting, but no less meaningful. He characterized it not as a lasting love affair, but as a series of intimate encounters, moments of human closeness carved out in a world that demanded constant denial. It wasn't about longevity, Donahue hinted. It was about being seen. For 2 men trapped by an industry that insisted upon their heterosexuality, even brief expressions of authenticity carried an almost subversive weight. The gravity of Donahue's confession lay not merely in the names he invoked, but in what they revealed about Hollywood itself. This was a system that had profited immensely from commodifying male beauty, while simultaneously punishing any deviation from its rigid definitions of masculinity. Actors like Hudson were marketed as symbols of idealized desire, projected onto billboards and silver screens, even as they endured the private torment of hiding who they truly were. Donahue's admission illuminated the stark divide between public persona and private reality, exposing the human cost of Hollywood's illusions. Perhaps the most haunting part of Donahue's recollection was his acknowledgement of fear. "If it had come out then," he confessed, "everything would have collapsed. We always had to pretend." That single sentence distilled the suffocating climate of mid-century Hollywood, where careers were obliterated not for scandalous behavior, but for the mere suggestion of queerness. To survive meant to live behind a mask, a perpetual performance that extended far beyond the film set. For Donahue, speaking in the 1990s, the disclosure carried layers of significance. It was an act of personal liberation, an attempt to reclaim a narrative that had long been suppressed. It was also, intentionally or not, a gesture of solidarity with those who had suffered in silence and those who had died before they could tell their stories. By naming Perkins and Hudson, both deceased by the time of his revelations, Donahue was not merely gossiping. He was honoring the truth of their shared humanity in a system that had denied it. Reactions to Donahue's revelations were mixed. Some dismissed them as belated confessions from a man seeking relevance in his later years. Others, however, recognized their historical importance. In an industry where silence had once been mandatory, Donahue's candor stood as a rare acknowledgement of what had long been whispered, but seldom confirmed. It underscored how deeply Hollywood had depended on the labor and talent of queer actors, while simultaneously erasing their identities from the official record. Troy Donahue's story is not only a behind-the-scenes Hollywood secret, but also a testament to the courage to speak the truth. It reminds us that behind the spotlight, many stars have to sacrifice their personal happiness to protect their careers. What do you think of this secret love story? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on other thrilling stories about the world of Hollywood celebrities.